Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheila with another story for you. Our story today is called A Dustpan for Jesus. A dustpan. To Cece, he came to the missionary, Mr. Bush, and he said, "Oh, sir, please, can I go back with you on your journey to the mission station? I'd like to learn so badly. I want to learn all about Jesus. Oh, please, sir, can I go with you?" The missionary, he looked at that little eager African boy and he said, "Well, do you have permission from your parents to go? And you also need permission from the chief of your village." And the little boy said, "I'll give permission. I'll be back." And then he turned around and he said, "If I get permission, can I go with you?" And the missionary said, "Yes, you can go with me." So by the next morning, that little African boy had permission to go. So in the morning, the missionary and all the helpers that went with him were ready to start on their journey. They had 9 weeks of travel to do. That's a lot of walking. And that's how they would have to get there. They had to walk through the jungles, and they had to walk through the plains, and they had to walk through the sandy desert. It was a long way, and especially a long way for a small boy. Every night when they stopped for camp, all the men that helped the missionary would cut big logs in sections, and they would make big piles of these logs in a big circle all the way around where they camped. And when it started to get toward dark, the missionary would go around and would light with matches all those big piles of logs, and they would burn, and the fire would stand up in a big circle all around that camp of the missionary. Well, the lions and most of the big animals were frightened of fire. So as long as the fire was burning, everybody could be safe inside. But poor little Tassisi, he was frightened of the noises that came out of the jungle. And when the lions would come close and roar, he thought, "I wonder." Well, that's what happened every single day as they walked for all those long miles. This was a long walk for a little boy, and it was hard on his little feet. You know, most of the African children had no shoes, and there were hard things in the path of the way they had to go. Part of Africa has big thorn bushes, and you know, if you got caught in them, it took a while to get out. So those bushes were nicknamed "Wait a bit," because if you got caught in a thorn bush, your friends would have to wait for you. Well, it was a difficult trip, but finally they arrived at that mission deep in the heart of the big continent of Africa. And Little Tassisi was so excited. He saw where the school was, and the missionary gave him a place to live, and he gave him a job to help his wife in the hut that the missionary lived in, Mr. Bush. And every day that little African boy got to go to school. And he loved learning. He loved everything about going to school. But most of all, he loved learning about Jesus. Well, months went by, and little Tassisi, he learned all about Jesus, and he started sharing with some of his little African friends at the school. Yes, they learned about Jesus in class, but he shared more and more till there were 6 little Christian boys, and they started going through the whole area right there at the mission, telling other people about the gospel and how good Jesus is and how he came to save them. Well, that was great. But time had passed, and the missionary one day came to say, I have to go on another one of my evangelistic journeys. I have to go to another part of Africa to tell the people there about Jesus. Well, little Tassisi, he had thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun and wonderful to go with the missionary again? Well, one day he had come by on his way to school by the missionary's hut. The missionary lived in a round hut just like all the African people did. And his wife had her broom out and she was sweeping up the floor. Well, little Tassisi, he watched. He saw the missionary's wife pick up a dustpan, and she took her broom and she swept up all the dirt and things off of that floor in the hut. And she took them out and threw them outside. And little Cece, he said, what is that in your hand? What do you call that? And she said, this is a dustpan. I use it to gather up all the dirt, to throw the dirt away so it's not in my house anymore. And he was so excited. He said, thank you. And he went running over to the school. Well, every morning the teacher had roll call. Well, when he got to Cece's name, he jumped up from his seat and he said, oh, teacher, I want everybody to know that my name is no longer Cece, which meant walking through the woods. And the teacher looked at him and he said, really? And he said, yes, my name is going to be Dustpan from now on. And the missionary teacher was astounded. He said, dustpan? Why would you want to be called Dustpan? Well, then the little boy answered and he said, because I want to go and clean out all the sin and the dirt and the bad things out of the people here in Africa. And I want to be called Dustpan because of that. And the missionary said, well, you just go and be a very good dustpan then. So some time went by, and it was time for the missionary to go on his journey. And little Dustpan went to the missionary again, and he said, oh, please, sir, Can I please go with you? Where you're going is up by my village. And I want to tell my family about Jesus. Please, can't I go with you? And then he said, my father could be killed in the tribal fights. My mother could be killed by a lion tending the garden. And my brothers and sisters could die of who knows what without even knowing anything about Jesus. Oh, please, can I go? Well, the missionary still thought that he was too little and that he should stay there at the school and learn. Once again, little dustpan said, oh, please, please. My father could die in the tribal fighting. My mother could die by a lion eating her in the garden. And my brothers and sisters could die. And I know about Jesus. I have to go tell them. Oh, please. Well, the missionary understood the little boy's desire to tell other people about Jesus because that's the way he felt too. And he said, okay, Dustpan, you can come with us. The little boys there had no shoes. And it was difficult to walk for all those miles through jungle, through the tall elephant grass, through the sands of the desert. It was hard for the little boy, but every day he eagerly got up and walked, till one day the missionary noticed that he was limping. And he went and looked at him and he said, what's wrong, Dustpan? And he said, my feet. And he held up his feet, and his feet were covered with blisters. And the missionary said, oh no. So he took him there into the camp, and he did the best he could. He put ointment and things on it. He wrapped it up in bandages. And then he took some of the softer grass and he made a big pile of that and wrapped around that. So there was something under Dustpan's feet to protect him from all the things he walked on. Well, that helped some. Well, as they had gone on for days and days and days, one day they were getting low in water in their canteens, and the missionary knew that there was a river not too far up the trail. Now, they walked on not roads, they walked on hippopotamus trails. Hippopotamuses like to walk to the river, and zebras and lions and elephants all like to go to the river. So that was the paths they walked on. But they hurried on their way. And when they got to the river, they needed to build that big circle of fire. They needed to set up their tents to sleep in. And they needed to fill all the canteens with water so they had plenty of water for the next day. Well, the missionary was down at the river with one of his helpers, and they filled all those canteens. Well, as they filled them, the missionary was counting them. But there was one canteen missing. And the missionary looked around, and he said, where's Dustpan? Has anybody seen Dustpan? And the other men went, we haven't seen him. Well, when did you see him last? The missionary asked. They said, we don't know. We don't remember. Well, some time back on the trail, when they were in that big, thick elephant grass, a lion had jumped out of that grass, and it had jumped right at one of the helpers, and he was carrying a big box on his back of supplies. And just when the lion was going to get him, he hopped out of the way. But the lion's paw caught on that big wooden box on the man's back, and it pulled the box off, and the box went tumbling down the hill into that grass. Well, the missionary, he was startled. He always carried a gun in case there was an emergency like this, but he was so anxious that he shot the gun, but he missed the lion. But the lion was afraid of that gunshot, and she growled and made all kinds of noise, but she disappeared into the grass, and they had gone on their way. Well, now the missionary was thinking, oh no. And then somebody voiced their opinion. They said, well, if he's been gone this long, he surely got eaten by that lion, or something other terrible's happened to him. There's nothing else we can do now. It's getting close to dark. The missionary, he felt awful. Why hadn't he kept track of little Dustpan? But he immediately fell on his knees in the dirt there and started talking to God. Oh, please take care of little Dustpan. He wanted so bad to go to tell his family about Jesus. Please help us to find him. May he be okay. Well, the missionary, he knew he didn't dare just go wander off into the grass and the jungles and Africa nights come on very suddenly, and they go from a bright, shiny sunset to instant darkness. But he could pray, and he did. And he watched that grass blowing back and forth in the breeze. And he kept watching to see for any unusual movement in that big, tall grass. And finally, as he was standing there worrying and praying and looking, he saw grass moving in an unusual pattern. And he looked and he went, Dustpan! And the missionary went rushing in, scooped him up. And then he saw little Dustpan's feet. Oh, if they had blisters before, now all the blisters were open and both little feet were bleeding. Well, once again, he treated his feet. And he told Dustpan, he said, the next village we come to, you can stay there, and I will pay the chief of that village to take care of you. And next year, when I come to go to your father's village, I'll take you then with me. And Dustpan said, no, please don't leave me here. I have to go. And once again he said, my father could die in the tribal fights. My mother could die from the lions in the garden. My brother and sisters could die of disease or anything. And they don't know about Jesus. There's nobody to tell them. So the missionary relented. On and on and on they went, till finally they got to little Dustpan's village. Now his father was a notorious witch doctor, and he was an evil, bad man. Rumors were that every year he killed about 600 people with either poisoning them or putting them on anthills or doing all kinds of terrible things to them to cause them to die. And everybody wondered in that missionaries group, could anyone reach somebody that was that bad? But little Dustpan was so excited to be home and see his mommy and his brothers and sisters and his father. He loved them all dearly, and he started telling them about the love of Jesus. And even his father seemed to pretend not to listen, but you could tell he was. And it wasn't too long later that the witch doctor, his wife, their 3 daughters, and their 5 sons all followed Jesus, and the missionary was able to baptize them. Oh, Dustpan was so excited, and he thought in his mind about all the dust and dirt and sin that he'd been able to carry out of that village so far. And then he and the missionary had started to have meetings there in his village. And little Dustpan, he was an ardent worker for God. He went from hut to hut telling people about Jesus and telling all the Bible stories that he had learned at the school, at the mission station. And he told all about the Bible and what was in it. And you know, the missionary, he had had to go back to the mission with all his helpers. But because this was home to Dustpan, Dustpan had stayed. And it was another full year till missionary Bush came back. And when he came back, do you know what he found? He found 226 people that wanted to be baptized, and they all came to the missionary eagerly and said, "We love Jesus now. Can you baptize us?" And all those people that were converted to Jesus were all because of Dustpan and how he had shared Jesus with all the people there. Do you know, boys and girls, children can do a good work for Jesus too, and tell their parents and tell their neighbors and friends, you can be like Dustpan and sweep all the bad dirt of sin and evilness out of your home and out of your community, so all that sin will go away because Jesus has forgiven you for it. I am glad that little Dustpan got to learn about Jesus, and I hope that each one of you know about Jesus. If you don't, ask your mommy and daddy to get down the Bible and read you the stories about Jesus. Thank you, boys and girls. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.